Hi guys, welcome back to my classics series. Today I'm going to be talking about classics for beginners, where you should start if you want to read classics. It's a video that I get asked to do a lot and I've never felt like I've read enough up until now. So instead of just doing this one video, I'm going to make it into a series within a series and do more videos like this of easy to read classics. So today I've just got one list, but I might do an updated one in the future. I don't want you to think this is exactly where you have to start, because obviously everyone's going to start in a different place, but these are the books that I would recommend if you want to get into reading classics but don't really know where to begin. So first I'm going to talk about the books that I started when I first reading classics. It worked really well for me and it's just made me read classics over and over again, so I can't have done anything wrong when I first started reading them. So I first started by reading Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen. I think this is a great place to start because there are so many film adaptations, so even if you read half of it and then watch the film and then read the other half afterwards, I think it's quite an encouraging thing. If you're not getting on with it, you can watch a film and then work out the storyline, and it's just a good place to start in terms of you've got a lot of support in place if you want to read it. There are so many articles, so many spark notes type things on Pride and Prejudice because it is taught. I don't know if it's still taught at GCSE. When I did GCSEs, this was on the curriculum. I don't know if it still is because they've changed it like crazy since I did my GCSEs, which was only 2 years ago. So I don't know if it still is, but there's so many resources out there if you want some backup when you're reading it. For those of you who don't know about Pride and Prejudice, this is about a girl called Lizzie Bennet, who is one of the best characters in literature ever, and she has a mother and a few sisters, and her mother is determined for all of them to get married. And the book starts with a man called Mr. Bingley coming into the area. He has this very big estate, and Lizzie Bennet's mum gets very excited and is determined to marry one of her daughters off to Mr. Bingley. There is a romance between Lizzie and Mr. Darcy. I've actually read a really interesting Tumblr piece on Mr. Darcy, so I'm going to leave that in the comments because I thought it was really great about how actually a lot of Jane Austen's heroines aren't attractive and how we perceive Mr. Darcy as being really handsome and beautiful, but he's not actually described in that way, but it's our modern take on him that makes him seem that way. So the book opens with a very famous line. "It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife." And Jane Austen's humour really comes through in this book. It is particularly noticeable in Pride and Prejudice, I think. I just finished reading Mansfield Park actually, which I don't think I would recommend starting with if you want to read Jane Austen because it's one of the bigger ones and not a lot happens in it, but I found that quite fascinating. But a lot does happen in Pride and Prejudice, so it's quite good if you want to focus your attention solely on it. So I read Mansfield Park and the humour is a lot more subtle in that, but the comedy of manners, which Jane Austen is really good at, comes across in Pride and Prejudice, and I really love it. And my favourite adaptation is the BBC, I think 1995 one with Colin Firth and Jennifer Ealer. I love it so much. It was a whole series of about 4 or 5, possibly 6 episodes, and it is amazing. It's one of the best adaptations of a book I've ever seen because it's so detailed. It's pretty much everything you could wish for in a book adaptation. You know when they cut loads of stuff out? This doesn't happen in this adaptation. I love it. I don't really like the film one with Keira Knightley. Just not a fan. I haven't been able to watch the whole thing all the way through because I just don't like it. But yes, Pride and Prejudice is a great place to start if you want to read classics. This is where I started, and then after I read Pride and Prejudice, I then read Agnes Grey by Anne Bronte. I love the Brontes. I think you all know by now how much I do. They are my favourite, and Anne is a seriously underrated Bronte. She also wrote The Tenth of Wildfell Hall, and whilst that might be a good place to start, I do think that the simplicity of Agnes Grey is really great if you are new to this style of language and the voice of the characters, because Anne writes in a very straightforward and easy way, and the narrative is simple too. The reason that Wuthering Heights isn't in this video is because the structure of it is quite confusing, and I think that can be quite off-putting if you're not used to that style. But what Anne does really well is just make you feel really comfortable in the writing. So Agnes Grey is about a woman called Agnes Grey, and she is a governess. She becomes a governess because her father is ill and then can't support the family. So one of the only things she can do is go out and become a governess, and it follows her as she works with 2 different families who are awful. They are not nice kids. Specifically the first family she goes to, they are awful. And I think that Anne writes in quite a subtle, humorous way too, and she's got a very good observation of the people around her, and Anne herself was a governess. So she does kind of draw on her experiences of being a governess. We can't say for sure how much of the book is true to her own experience, but I like to think that some of it is. It's got a really cute, sweet romance. Mr. Weston is probably the best character in all the Bronte books. He's the nicest. You have Heathcliff and Mr. Rochester, who are detestable human beings, and Mr. Weston is everything you could want in a husband. He is perfect, and I love this book. I think it would be a great place to start, and I'd love to see more people read it. Then we have a book that I'm only halfway through, so my recommendation is a bit but I still want to recommend it, and it is Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This is the Penguin English Library edition. You see them all behind me. I love my Penguin English Library editions. This is about a man called Dr. Frankenstein who makes a monster. No, the monster is not called Frankenstein. Frankenstein is the one who makes the monster. Common misconception. I will correct anyone who says otherwise. It gets on my nerves when people get that wrong. So Frankenstein is all about him making the monster, and I have to admit that Mary Shelley isn't one of my favourite writers. I don't really click with her style, but it is very easy and straightforward to read. It's a pretty short book, and because people know the story, you can follow along with it really easily. I want to finish it soon because I should have finished it ages ago, and I read half of it last year, didn't finish the other half, so I would like to do that soon. As I said earlier about the structure of Wuthering Heights, this one is kind of similar, but I think it's a lot easier to follow along with if you expect it. So the first bit is told in letters, and then there's a little bit from a man on a boat in the Arctic or Antarctic, I think maybe the Arctic. He goes on about that and about seeing this monster. So if you expect that narrative style and you like that, then I think you could go on to Wuthering Heights. I think this is a good book that you could read to get used to that gothic style. It's quite a gothic thing to have somebody else telling the story who's not involved with the story. I don't know what it is, and I don't particularly like it, but I think that Frankenstein is a good way to introduce yourself to that style of writing. And this was written when Mary Shelley was only 18, and I'm 17 now, so I've got to get a move on and write a book like Frankenstein, haven't I? I haven't got long. I've got a year, basically, to write a book like a Mary Shelley. I can't believe she was 18, and it's... well, I can believe she's 18, because teenagers are amazing. We are incredible, and we can do anything we set our minds to. But also, she was 18, and that is amazing. I love Mary Shelley for that. I like Mary Shelley as a person more than I like her writing, but I would highly recommend Frankenstein. Then I want to recommend to you Camilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. This is a novella, and it is a vampire story, so if you like Twilight, I don't know if that's a good comparison, but if you want to read Dracula, then I would read this first, because this came before Dracula, and I haven't read Dracula yet, but I kind of wanted to read Camilla first because it's shorter than Dracula. Dracula is really long, and I'm a bit put off by its size, because even I get scared by the size of classics. Like, I'm never going to read Middlemarch, let's face it, it's 1,000 pages. That puts me off. Camilla it's kind of weird because the main character is a girl who was kind of seduced by Camilla. It was written in 1872, or it might have been written before that, but it was published for the first time in 1872. And there's so much gay subtext in there that it's quite surprising when you read it. Camilla is this really fascinating character because she is so seductive, and she kind of subverts everything about Victorian women in the fact that she is really bad. She's such an anti-heroine, and I really like that. I think it's a fascinating viewpoint to read about. I think it's a really fascinating book to read, particularly if you want to look at reading more critically. I think that Camilla would be a great way to do so because it's a short book, but there's a lot packed into there and a lot of interesting tropes and different things that don't even appear for the rest of the Victorian period or even earlier. I think it's quite a unique book, and I really want to read more of J. Sheridan Le Fanu's works after reading this because I really did enjoy it. It's a bit of an unusual book, but in a good way, so I'd highly recommend this. Then we have more of a series of books I want to read. They are the Penguin Little Black Classics, which I think are amazing if you maybe not sure about reading a full-length book by an author but want to know more about their style. I would highly recommend these. My favourites are The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is quite a popular novella. I didn't love it, but I think a lot of other people do. I was maybe a bit unique in not enjoying it as much. I think maybe because other people did enjoy it a lot, I just didn't live up to my expectations fully. But it's definitely a feminist novel. It deals a lot with mental health in a Victorian way and the treatment of it, and it's a character who's going mad and thinks that the wallpaper in the room she's in is moving and is alive, and it's a really fascinating thing to read. And in here there are also some other short stories in this edition. It's The Yellow Wallpaper and then The Rocking Chair and Old Water, and they've kind of got a creepy feel to them. And the ending of The Yellow Wallpaper is, well, you've got to read it to find out what it is, but it's it just sent chills up my spine. I would highly recommend that one. And then there is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainer Maria Rilke, which was one of my favourite books of last year. It is so inspirational. If you're a writer, if you enjoy writing, I would highly recommend reading this because the advice that he gives is so poetic and lyrical. It's so inspirational, and it's one of those books that I'm going to reread a lot over my lifetime because I love it. It's so beautiful and it just really motivates me in kind of a weird way. It's not a book that tells you this is how you should write, but it does it in quite a subtle way, and I really like that. And then the other one I want to recommend is Lady Susan by Jane Austen. This is such an amazing book and I wish more people would read it because it is hilarious. It was one of the books that she wrote when she was a lot younger. It's one of the ones that we class as Jane Austen's juvenilia. So she wrote it when she was quite young, but you wouldn't be able to tell that because she always writes amazingly. It doesn't matter how old she is. Like I said about Mary Shelley, it doesn't matter that she's young when she writes it. It's still amazing, and I don't think we should separate particularly the juvenilia from the adult works, especially in the case of Jane Austen. In the Brontes you can really see the difference, but with Jane Austen you can't. So Lady Susan is about a woman called Lady Susan who, she's again an anti-heroine, and she's hilarious because she is quite saucy and seductive as well, a bit like Camilla, but she does it in a very different way, and she just tries and seduces all the men she's near, and she tries to marry off her daughter. And there is actually a film adaptation called Love and Friendship, and I love that film. I think it really captures the humour of Jane Austen, and this one as well is pretty short. It's one of the later Penguin Littleback classics, so it is a bit longer. This one is £2, so again these are really affordable editions of the books. If you don't really know where to start but want to start somewhere, I would highly recommend the Penguin Littleback classics. And it is 117 pages and it's told in letters, so it's really digestible reading. You can pick it up and put it back down again, and you can probably read it in a week at a slow pace. At a fast rate you could probably read it in a day. Lady Susan is an amazing character, and you don't just get the letters from her perspective, you get everyone else talking about her too, so you get a lot of different views on her, and so you're not really sure if as a reader you like her or not. But I love her. I think she's an amazing character, and I wish there were more characters like her in Jane Austen that Jane wasn't so disapproving of, because you don't get that sense in Lady Susan. You just get that she's crafting this character, and it's up to the reader to decide whether she's moral or not and whether you like her or not. I can't speak highly enough of this book. I wish more people would read it. It's described in the back as glittering with Austen's subversive young imagination. This wicked early novella features a devious, adulterous anti-heroine, and that perfectly sums up the book. And then the final books I want to talk to you about are all American classics, which I think is a really good place to start as well because the language is so much more easy to understand, and these were all written around the 1920s to 1950s period. And the first one I want to recommend to you is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I've just finished studying this for my English literature course, and I'm really sad to leave it behind actually. I didn't always love it, but towards the end of the year as I reread it for my exam, I really fell in love with it. And F. Scott Fitzgerald has such a beautiful writing style. He's so descriptive, so imaginative. The way he uses language to craft his books is just incredible. If you're a writer, it's a really useful thing to study how he does it, because if I could replicate something half as good, that would be amazing. His writing is incredible. I've only read The Great Gatsby by him, but I want to read more. And this is about Jay Gatsby, and he is quite an elusive rich man, and it's told from the perspective of Nick, who has just moved to this area of new money in New York, or on the outskirts of New York. There's the new money and then the old money, and they're different parts of the island, and it's all about how people made money after the First World War, and how the people of old money were quite disapproving of that, and the people who were of new money, who made money from scratch, from absolutely nothing, then get treated. And what I love about it is that it's kind of got that Romeo and Juliet feel of star-crossed love, which I think that Shakespeare does really well. Even though Romeo and Juliet isn't my favourite play, I think he does do it really well, and you kind of get that same feel in the book. I love Nick and Gatsby. I think they've got a really wonderful relationship, and Nick is a really interesting character to read from because his perspective, he talks about being unbiased, how he doesn't judge anyone, but the book is him kind of judging and picking his moments to judge the people around him. Particularly by the end of the book you get that sense that he has been judging them all along, so I would highly recommend that. It's a good one to analyse if you want to be more critical again, but you can also read it for pleasure and have a lot of fun with it. And then the final book I want to recommend to you is one of my favourite books of all time, and it is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. I actually studied this in year 8 of school, so when I was about 13 or 14, and I really loved it then. It was a time when I actually really needed this book because it's about Holden Caulfield, and I think it's again about mental health and depression, and it's about pent-up emotions and expressing yourself. And Holden is a really interesting character. Not everybody likes this book, but I have to admit that I really enjoyed it when I read it. I don't know if I'd enjoy it again if I read it. We'll see. I might reread it soon. I would highly recommend it. I think that J.D. Salinger is very self-important, a bit up himself, but I actually much prefer the way that J.D. Salinger writes in that style, because I feel like he owns up to it. He's not trying to hide the fact that he loves himself. It's kind of evident in his words, but that is a problem that I have altogether with American literature. I just feel like a lot of the authors from between like the 1920s and 1960s are just a bit self-important, and I don't like that, but I think that it works very well with Holden Caulfield, who is a very interesting character. If you've read Unlike the Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath, you'll really enjoy this, or vice versa. I love both of them in very different ways, but I still really love them. So that was my classics for beginners video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books, or if you have any further recommendations to add to my list for people who are maybe a bit nervous to read classics but still want to. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video, and I will see you guys soon. Happy reading!